Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Alec Harris, and I'm honored to serve as president of GIA Publications. And it is my incredible honor to welcome you to this webinar with the amazing Dennis Shrock. Over the years, GIA has published several books with Dennis, a book on Renaissance performance practice, Baroque and classical performance practices. We published a performance practice on Handel's Messiah, and a book on repertoire called Music for Beginning Conductors, and this latest text called Creating Excellence in Choirs and Orchestra, which is fantastic. And Dennis is going to be spending a fair amount of his time today talking about this text. If you do have any questions, you can put them into the chat or into the Q&A panel. I'll be monitoring them, and we're going to spend the last 10 or 15 minutes of the webinar answering questions if you have them. We are taping this, and it will be available for viewing off of our YouTube channel later. So tell your friends about this. And I'm also going to put into the chat a coupon code so that if you do want to order any of Dennis's books, you can get a 15% discount if you use that code until October 1st. So with that very brief introduction, I'm really pleased again to welcome Dennis to this webinar. And Dennis, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alec, not only for this, but for all your support over the years with these books. You may not remember, but it was actually you who attended one of my presentations at an ACDA conference, and it was on Renaissance music. And then you said, you've got to turn this into a book. And so I did. But just a little bit about this newest book, Creating Excellence, which is, and Alec, why don't you show image number one, which is a relative departure from my focus on performance practice and also just repertoire in and of itself through the Oxford books. But during this past pandemic year, my professional life came to an end, like it did for virtually everybody else. I had been subscribing to an Apple TV site called the Berlin Philharmonic Digital Concert Hall with live performances pretty much every week, and then an archived collection of almost 600 performances and interviews. So with not a whole lot else to do, I started tuning in more and more and more, and then I thought, well, this is really, really great. And the whole idea of their excellence, especially coming through the interviews. You have interviews with not only with conductors, but with the players themselves in the orchestra. And I thought, this is fascinating about the process of creating excellence. And then, of course, I remembered my days, as a student at Westminster Choir College, when the symphonic choir performed with Leonard Bernstein, the Mahler symphonies, with Herbert von Karajan in Berlin, the Beethoven Ninth, with Ormandy, the Philadelphia Orchestra. And then when I was back on the faculty at Westminster, I encountered, most of the greats that came through: Howard Swan, Weston Noble, Robert Shaw, Roger Wagner, even Ken Jennings from St. Olaf. And so I proposed to Alec, how about this book? And he suggested, sure enough. And so I put it into 14 sections. So Alec, if you want to show the table of contents, image number 2.
Sure.
So the first 7 of these are what I called theoretical concepts. And they're coming up here right now. Right. Goals, focus, attitudes, structures, procedures, responsibility, and ontology. And then I gave each one a subtitle to just kind of, for fun in a way, but to really underscore what about these topics I was really going to talk. And tonight, or today, I'm going to talk about 1, goals, 5, procedures, the how is important as the why, and then ontology, time flies when you're having fun, and I'll explain ontology when I get to it. And then Alec, if you'll do the next one, practical applications, then it's B, study, warm-up, sound, cohesion, expression, conducting, and repertoire. I'll talk about sound and expression if I've certainly got time to do that. In any event, let's just head right to image number 3, which is goals, and extremely important. I think as I reviewed my experiences, and then also as I did research on the great conductors, both choral in the past and certainly orchestral, there were elements that came through that were pertinent and inclusive of all of them. And they are, as you can see in the second paragraph, there are specific things, activities that are objective and tangible, and they're understood by everybody involved. Everybody knows what the goal is. If you are with Robert Shaw and count singing for rehearsal after rehearsal after rehearsal, you knew what the goal was, rhythmic precision. That was it. Belief that they can be attained. Of course, everybody believed what the end result might be. And then third, focus that avoids distractions. And this is something I really want to talk about more in depth here, because we, as choral conductors, can get distracted a lot. Something is presented to us. We have a piece that we're going to sing, and people, respond back to us, and we're hit with a barrage of things, pitches and rhythms and diction and tuning and balance and blend. And it's hard not to address these. And many conductors just do what I call is the shotgun approach. They just go from here to there, to da, 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 and they try to accomplish all of them, and they can't. I mean, no great excellence has been accomplished or has been realized by trying to accomplish all these things. The great conductors have had a singular laser-like focus, and they have not been detracted away from that. The fourth thing is they've persisted during times of frustration. And here I want to say, and I also mention in the book, this is not just for conductors, choral, or orchestral, or band, or any musical leaders. This is anybody and everybody who's created certain greatnesses of excellence. It was true with Hershey and chocolate. He experienced failure after failure after failure, but he persisted. Henry Ford did the same thing. Heinz, of Heinz ketchup, which we all know, and I know of having grown up in Pittsburgh. Heinz even failed so much he went into bankruptcy and was put in jail. But he got out and he persisted because it was just so important. And so all of these are really, really important. So when I go out, for instance, and I'm working with choirs, doing workshops, and the choir is singing something, the conductor asks the choir to sing something, and the choir sings it back. And it's not great. I mean, maybe a little bit is accomplished, but not really fully. And the conductor goes on. And so sometimes I just stand up, run up to the stage and say, wait, no, you asked them to do it and they didn't do it. You can say no. You can say no, in all sorts of wonderful ways to a choir or an orchestra, and say, we really need to accomplish this. Because if you don't, then it's not going to take hold and you're not going to move to the next one. So you must establish a goal and then keep to it, not be distracted, and in a way, keep your eyes and ears on the prize, or as I say for the subtitle of this particular chapter, keep the finish line in sight, at all times. And so a little, personal experience. In the year before the pandemic, one of my workshops was with a day-long workshop with middle school girls. This is true. I'm going to repeat. I did day-long workshop with middle school girls. They were all from one district, and the director of the entire district got together with the individual middle school girl directors and said, this is what we're going to do. And they all agreed that they wanted to work on sound. So they came to this rehearsal. Well, back up a little bit. They chose about a dozen pieces. And from those, I chose 5 that I thought would really work for the accomplishment of sound during it. And when the girls came in and I was introduced, and we did some calisthenics just to kind of get warmed up and get the thing going, I explained to them exactly the goal of the day. And I said, in part, we can buy a Stradivarius violin if we're a billionaire, or we can go out and buy a Steinway or Bösendorfer piano. But for voices and orchestras, we can make them great. There are bodies, we are in the process of making them great, and here's how we go about it. And we're going to work on sound today, and it's going to be frustrating at times. And I'm going to want to work on some other things, but I'm not going to. I'm going to work on sound only. And I guarantee you, by the end of the day, you're going to be happy because the sounds are going to be so beautiful, and your parents are going to love them when they come to the concert in the evening. And so the day went along, and there were strategies here and strategies there. And sure enough, there were frustrations when we had worked on it in warm-ups, but the sound didn't carry through in the pieces of music, et cetera, and so forth. But I persisted. I absolutely persisted, and then talked with the conductors. They were all there too. And we accomplished it. And I didn't talk about pitch rhythm, accuracy, and those sorts of things, although they came together. And that's the point. The point is, if you give it enough time, and I'll talk about this momentarily, things that you're not addressing will take care of themselves. So Robert Shaw didn't work on blend, but blend sure happened because of all the count singing that kept on going on over the time. So in one's effort, your effort, our effort to accomplish excellence, first and foremost, you have to be goal-oriented. And the goal needs to be very specific. And it can be for a month. It can be for a semester or a term. And then once that's accomplished, then one can move on to another goal, and then another goal, and then a goal after that. When I conducted a community chorus in Oklahoma City, Canterbury Choral Society, and in conjunction, I was assistant conductor of the Oklahoma Symphony, I had multi-year goals. And we were finally able to do the Brahms Requiem, which the music director of the Oklahoma Symphony desperately wanted to do after 10 years. I'm serious, not before 10 years. We just were not going to be able to do it in an excellent manner. And I was not going to give it to the music director in a less than excellent manner, because then he wouldn't like me. So goals. And now let's move on to image number 4, Alex. Procedures, which I subtitle "The How is as important as the Why," which is to say, you need to really focus on what you're doing, along with why you are supposed to be doing it. And I've developed this, and in the book, into 3 categories. 1, showing and talking, 2, singing, playing, and stopping, and 3, seating and standing. And so under the first category, and Alec, if you'll just leave this up here, don't say what you can show. Conductors almost universally talk too much, and they can communicate more and more specifically through gestures than they can through verbal communication. So you, I, everybody, we need to trust in the power of our gestures to communicate, and let this manner of communication be the driving force of our pursuit of excellence. And we have to do this because none of us have enough time. None of us have all the rehearsals in the world. Now, early on with the Oklahoma Symphony, it was a fully salaried orchestra, and they didn't fulfill all their services. And so the general manager of the orchestra from time to time would say, Dennis, do you want another rehearsal? And I'd say, yeah, sure. But no one's going to get that. Even in professional orchestras, Berlin, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Chicago, the maximum is 5. You will not get any more than 5 rehearsals for a performance. And this will include sometimes pieces that the orchestra has never seen before. And then the third part of the showing and talking is redirect all non-musical communications, which I mean to say, don't let anything in rehearsal take away from the music. Not announcements, not coffee hour, not all these sorts of other things. Robert Shaw did Dear People letters after rehearsal. I also communicated with my people and then through email so that they got a rundown of the previous rehearsal, a prelude to the coming rehearsal. This is what we're going to try to accomplish. Now, for this middle one, categories here, singing, playing, and stopping, singers and instrumentalists learn as they sing and play. So when I just said with the middle school girls, which Jim Moyer, I see that you're here on here, you will remember because it was with you that I did this. So I didn't work on pitch accuracy, exactly, or rhythmic accuracy, but they came together because the singers learned as they went along. This always happens. And so I'm going to say as an experiment, when you hear something that's not right and it strikes you and you want to do something about it, it's almost as if you can't resist the urge. I'm going to ask you, resist the urge. Don't say anything and see if it will correct itself the next time around or the next time around. Instead, focus your attention on your goal of the day or the term or the year, or so to speak. So give them a chance. Now, British choir, the Royal, whatever it is, School of Church musicians, British boy choirs have a tradition of when the kids make a mistake, they just dart up their hand really quickly, like so. Then the conductor knows, they know they've made a mistake, and so they can just go on. It's a great technique. And then the middle thing of singing, playing, and stopping here, work for and expect transfer of learning. So when you've done something in one rehearsal and you've accomplished it, expect that that's going to happen in the next rehearsal. And when it doesn't, as it likely won't, tell them, now folks, we did this. You remember how we did this, and it's your responsibility to make sure that this happens again. That's what music educators call transfer of learning. And so do that, and don't repeat unnecessarily. Maybe review a bit, but after a certain amount of times, work so that what was accomplished remains accomplished and continues to be accomplished over rehearsal periods, so that you're not going back to square one, so to speak. And then finally, in this middle segment, develop performer ownership and responsibility. So when you let the singers and players learn as they sing and play, and when you expect that they will have the responsibility, that they will transfer their learning, then they will develop ownership and responsibility in the ensemble. One of my chief failures or criticisms as an early conductor was that I took responsibility for everything. And I gave them no responsibility, and it eventually just didn't work so well. And then, of course, when I had the graduate program at the University of Oklahoma, and there were all these phenomenally talented and experienced conductors, I had to, really tell them things that would work for them. And so I eventually learned from them. So ownership and responsibility are critical, absolutely critical for any establishment of excellence, no matter what you're doing, whether it's music or anything else. And then finally, in this segment, arrange the performers to support your goals. So for instance, we have standard kind of choral seating. So Alec, if you'll do image number 5. So the average here is sopranos and altos on the front, the basses behind the sopranos for functional overtones in back of them, and the tenors behind the altos. I mean, that's relatively standard. It could be something different. But Alec, if you'll go to image number 6, if you have a middle school and you have very few tenors, or you have voices that are obviously changing, you might want to surround them, put the sopranos on the one side and altos on the other side, the tenors supported in the middle and the basses behind them. Alec, you can just put that away, for a moment, and actually go back to me, if you don't mind. When I was working with the Santa Fe Desert Chorale, and I accomplished, there was some blend problem, the first thing I did, absolutely truthfully, the first thing I did was rearrange the singers. When I got to know Weston Noble, he told me that that's what he always did too. I mean, he just rearranged them in order so that they could work better together with them. When I worked with the Oklahoma Symphony and the trumpets, you are playing too loudly, as they almost always do. One rehearsal, I had them sitting right in front of me, literally right in front of me. And of course, they were uncomfortable, they were embarrassed, but they did not play as loudly as they did back in the back of the orchestra. And I did lots of different rearrangements. So now, Alec, if you go to image number 7. So for orchestral seating, so it's relatively normal to have the violins on the conductor's, first violins on the conductor's left, and the second violins on the right. This is especially true for Baroque and classical music. I mean, and everybody's doing that these days. Or the cellos, used to be pretty much on the right. If it's Berlin standard, the violas are on the right, which is to say the violin ones are on the left, then the violin twos may be there, or the cellos, and then the violas will be directly across from the conductor on the right, with the flute, oboe, clarinet, and a bassoon in a wind quartet grouping in the middle. However, you'll find it interesting that the Amsterdam Concertgebouw that is almost universally always praised as one of the 3 top orchestras in the world, the 3 of them being Berlin, Vienna, and the Concertgebouw. The Concertgebouw has the bassoons in back of the flutes and the clarinets in back of the oboes. So if you're looking at the chart here, the bassoons and clarinets are switched. Now, this makes sense because the lowness of the bassoon creates the fundamental overtone that the flutes can tune to. Flutes often playing sharp, too sharp. And so this helps with the tuning. Why more orchestras don't do this, I'm not exactly sure. But nevertheless, it's the case. So there can be all sorts of arrangements. So Alec, if you'll do image number 8. This is a performance that is on the, Schubert. This is on the Berlin Philharmonic archives. So if you are subscribed to the digital concert hall, this is December 22nd, 2018, a performance of Schubert Symphony No. 8, conducted by Ivan Fischer. And this is exactly how the orchestra was situated, with the winds in front, oboe, flute, bassoon, and clarinet in front of the strings, with the horns in the middle, trumpet, trombone, string bass, and timpani behind them. Now, Ivan Fischer likely knew that the ideal ensemble sound during the classical era was one they called harmonia. And it's a wind sound. It wasn't a string sound. And when there were large numbers of strings, more than 4, up to 6. So if they had 6 violin ones and 6 violins too, the winds were doubled. During the classical era, they had 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 playing from the same part. And if there were much bigger ones, they were even tripled. There are accounts of this, there are diagrams of this. There is the famous performance of Haydn's Creation with tripled winds and tripled brass and lots of strings. So in one's effort to create excellence, change the seating, change the the environment of the players and singers so that they can hear each other better, relate to each other better, and create the excellence that is innate in the piece of music. Okay, so now we're going to go to image number 9, Alex, please. Ontology. So those of you who know me, that this is one of my favorite topics. Time flies when you're having fun. That really describes it pretty much. Ontology is the study of being in time. So I'm going to say that again, the study of being in time. And we can refer to it as psychological time, or even better, understand it as some minutes seem like hours and some hours seem like minutes. Now, Albert Einstein said that that's real time. He said, we impose a fixed time, but time is really flexible. And those of us, we all have experienced those moments, of time seeming to move faster and time seeming to move slower. Now, of course, when we're in our pursuit of excellence, what we want is to establish a quick flow of time. That's what we're after. And when the rehearsal seems to fly by, or the concert seems to fly by, we know we've accomplished something good. Now, there's an author who's at Stanford University who talks about this in his book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, in an almost, thank you, Alec, unpronounceable name, Miguel Csikszentmihalyi, is my best, guess at this. And it's a really wonderful book. Not difficult to comprehend. It's really pretty accessible. And Csikszentmihalyi says that in any activity that we're doing, whether it's sports, or music or something else, we want to be engaged in an activity where there is challenge, but also expectation of accomplishment. So I'll explain this another way. If we're in rehearsal and the challenge is too great in the eyes of the musicians, then time is going to move slowly. If we're in this experience and the music is too accessible, it's too simple, the singers and players will become bored and time will move slowly. We need to strive to achieve a balance between accessibility, which is to say, we believe we can accomplish this, and challenge. Oh, this is really going to be challenging to do every rehearsal. When we're in that period of psychological experience, we are in what Csikszentmihalyi says is a period of flow. And that's what we are striving to achieve. So to kind of recap that, goals need to be challenging, but accomplishable. Great, you can go, yeah, great, thanks, Alec. And so, just by the way, all of what I'm saying here is described at considerable length in the book, Creating Excellence. So if you want to know more about it, you know how you can do that. And so number two, in terms of ontology, plan rehearsals for interest and success. First of all, plan rehearsals. Not just one plan, but plan for your goal, obviously, because I'm expecting transfer of learning. We've talked about goals. I'm expecting that that, of course, the goals are going to be at everything. So Alec, if you'll go to image 11. So here would be, for instance, a sonata form designed for a choral rehearsal, an introduction, exposition, development, recapitulation, and coda. So as an example, the introduction will be warm-ups. And of course, the warm-ups will be designed to pertain to what one is accomplishing during the rehearsal. When I talk about warm-ups in the book, it's not game playing time, is precisely that. It's not game playing time, and warm-up should not be that. But then for the exposition is the presentation of the rehearsal's themes. If you're in a first movement of a symphony, you present the themes or the goals. And you present these, of course, they're written on a whiteboard or blackboard or image, whatever. But you present them in terms of the music. Here's what we're trying to accomplish, and you're going to accomplish it, something relatively accomplishable. And then you get to the development, when you have to work on challenging segments of the theme. So these are the hard parts of the music that are not so easily accomplished. And then, after obviously considerable work and time, then you bring them back to fruition. The recapitulation, you bring back the themes, and you basically accomplishment. See, we started out with this, we've worked on, and we've accomplished them, making sure that you insist that they're accomplished. And then finally, for a coda, conclude with a sense of positive accomplishment. For me, it was always, let's do something that we already know we can do. Or I even ask them, okay, we've got 3.5 minutes, or we've got 4 minutes left in the rehearsal. What do you want to sing? And then they'll say. And okay, that's what we'll do. So that they leave the room feeling good. And here I'll say, in my very first conducting class at Westminster Choir College, I was a transfer student, so I wasn't exactly a freshman, but I was new to music, that's for sure. And this is true. And you'll understand why I've never forgotten it. I, typical of me, did put everything in its place and did what I was supposed to do. And the teacher, whose name was George Lynn, he was music director of the choir college at that time, pulled me aside and he said to me, now give them a reason to come back tomorrow. And of course, I knew not what he was talking about then. And for many years, I didn't know what he was talking about. But eventually I knew that that was my responsibility, to give them a reason to come back tomorrow, whether they had to or not, whether I was paying them to come back or not. I wanted to give them a reason to come back tomorrow. So let's now go to image 12, which is, just an idea for an orchestral rehearsal.
Dennis, we do have a question in the Q&A from John Atley, going back to the slide on flow, or the points on flow. And he just wanted to know if you had any anecdotes for when you achieve flow with an ensemble. How can you evaluate if you're achieving flow after the fact?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, so a guy in rehearsal, well, just as he's leaving, just come in and said, that's just the fastest rehearsal I've ever had. I mean, literally, somebody said that to me. Well, what better there's nothing better that I want to hear. And then equally is the same thing. Okay, we're done fine. And they look over at the clock, I mean, with an unrealization that, oh, rehearsal's finished? Oh, really? And so there's that kind of testimony. And then, of course, singers, in the Santa Fe Desert Chorale, I can't believe it's intermission. I just can't believe it when we would get to our break time. But of course it was, because we had everything timed. With those concert, it was 60 minutes of music, more or less. It turned out to be an hour and a half experience, given everything with intermission and so forth. And so, yeah, it was that. And then audience members, of course, there were any number of audience members, that would say, oh, the time just sped by, simply as that. And so for you who asked that question, you will get them. First of all, be attuned to it. You can tell if they're bored, or if you can tell that they're anxious and fidgeting around and so forth. But if they're not, if they're focused, and we're all engaged, that's a good reaction that time is speeding by and you're in this optimum flow experience. And then, of course, when you get either negative or positive responses at the end, you'll also know. So then on to the orchestral rehearsal. So you model something and then you transfer it. You take a break, you model something else and you transfer it. So most orchestral things are just a couple of pieces, 3 max. I mean, if you're doing a Bruckner or Mahler symphony, sometimes it's just that, just one piece. But say you've got 2 pieces. So you start off with playing what works best to kind of set the stage. This is what's good. Then you rehearse like you did with the choir. You rehearse what is most challenging, what's most difficult. Then, of course, if it's a professional orchestra, you must take a break. It must be a 20-minute break, and it's gauged into when this can happen, when it can't happen, but it's relatively in the middle of the rehearsal. And then for the second half of rehearsal, rehearse what best displays and ensures character or expression, as I'm going to end the webinar with, if I get there. It is this that will get beyond the notes and the rhythms, and that will coalesce everybody into one unit. And so the transfer is you play for syntheses of technique and expression. It's just an idea. You create your own idea. But I've got to get on now to image 13 on programming, because this is, again, hugely important, really hugely important. And so we have here what I'm calling Snails First. And I've got to read for you how I describe this, because it comes from my great friend, Elliot, with whom I went to high school in Pittsburgh, who is on the executive committee of the board of the Pittsburgh Symphony. He's raised millions of dollars for them, continues to do so, and is a great supporter of the symphony. And he talks about what he calls Snails First. And he says, we go to a restaurant that is famous for its veal scallopini. And as we arrive, we are given a menu that lists the several dinner items that will be served: snails, sushi, veal scallopini, and a banana split. We only want the veal, we say to the waiter, but we have no choice. We must first eat the snails and sushi before we can have the veal. Well, of course, this is not going to happen. Not in a restaurant. We go to an Italian restaurant and we get Italian fare, you know, or we go to a Jewish delicatessen, we get great pastrami sandwiches. We go to a Chinese restaurant and we, you get the picture. And we go to movies and see one thing. We go to a sporting event and see one thing. We go on a vacation and we do one thing. We play games and we do one thing. We play Monopoly, or we play cards. We don't play some of one and some of the other. We don't go to a movie and see a mixture of Harry Potter and Sherlock Holmes. It's one thing. Concert should be the same thing, one aesthetic thing. So the conductors that say, oh, we need to give a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and if we don't do modern works, they won't come. Well, it just doesn't really work. And so here are real live concerts by the Berlin Philharmonic, as you can see by their dates. You can hear that start with Snails First. Now, some of you may love snails, and that's great. But Thomas Adès, then Mozart, then Stravinsky. The next one, Kaja Saariaho, and then Britten, and then Berlioz. Britten, The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, and then Berlioz, Symphonie Fantastique. The third one, when Kraft, The Rite of Spring, and then Symphonic Dances from West Side Story. The next one, Harrison Birtwistle, and then Mahler Symphony No. 3. I mean, really, how is this going to give the audience an experience of excellence? It's not. And so I want to talk about more and more and more and more and more, but I can't. So I'm going to go on to the next 14, please, Alex, to show that Berlin's not all bad. Berlin's really pretty good. So here is a concert with Dvorak, Bartok, and Janacek. Great. And then look at this next one, Beethoven Symphony No. 1 and Symphony No. 9, the Alpha and the Omega. Oh, fantastic. And then third one, an all John Adams concert. And then the fourth one I really love, two works on Goethe's Faust, Wagner Faust Overture and Liszt a Faust Symphony. And then in the last one, Mozart Symphony, Haydn Aria, Mozart Aria, Haydn Symphony. These are fascinating to audiences and performers, and can really help with an aesthetic unity, which contributes to excellence. And moving on to 15, please, Alec. Key relationships. This is even more important than anything else. Now, when you don't much have to face this with an orchestra because you're only doing a couple of pieces. But with choirs, you may be doing 20 or more pieces in a concert. And if you do, and each piece is followed by applause, you fracture the experience. You absolutely fracture it, and time goes slowly. What you want to do is bind things together, and key relationships help. So I published through GIA 3 Dowland lute songs, which I'll show you later on here. And it just so happens that these 3 are in the order of A minor, D minor, G major. So A becomes the dominant of D, D becomes the dominant of G, A, D, G. And so that is one of your best means of accomplishing a unified aesthetic experience so that it all seems to move quickly. In the English Renaissance madrigals, so these 3 are tracks 13, 14, and 15 on the GIA recording Renaissance Reborn, which you should definitely buy. But if you don't, you can go on my website, and it's there, and literally listen to tracks 13, 14, and 15, and you get the same thing. When As Vesta Was from Latmos Hill Descending ends in E major, and Weep O Mine Eyes begins in A minor, it seems like E belongs going to A, and then of course the next one goes to D. It's again a dominant tonic relationship. And then the Russian motets can be heard on the Santa Fe Desert Chorale recording, Journeys of the Spirit. Again, it's on my website, dennisshrock.com. And these are tracks 7, 8, 9, and 10, especially 9 and 10, from B minor to E major, is one of the most glorious listening experiences ever. And it's not just for me. Everybody who listens to it just gives a sigh and says, oh my God, that's beautiful. And it's beautiful because of the way B minor leads to E major. And it makes it feel like the Chesnikov and Krachininoff motets are bound together. It's one experience, and therefore good ontology. Time moves fast. Okay, so Alec, your choice here. I can talk about sound, or we can just do Q&A, depending on what you see there.
So I don't see too many questions, so please do. If you have questions for Dennis Shrock, please enter them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll continue to monitor. In the meantime, I think, Dennis, keep going with your
All right.
presentation.
16 sound. Okay, so it used to be, in many years to come, that choirs and orchestras had their one sound, as in Sir Simon Rattle of the Berlin says here at the very end, you can see Einklang. That's what he works for, one sound. So F. Melius Christiansen at St. Olaf had their sound. No matter what they did, that was the sound. With Westminster Choir College and John Finley Williamson, a completely different sound, and it was everything. So with orchestras, it was Toscanini, he had his sound, Eugene Normandy had his sound, but you can't do that anymore. It's just impossible. We have to know the music, and we have to create the sound that's innate in the music, which is why I say sound is in and comes from the music. It's there every bit as much as the notes are there and the rhythm is there. The sound is there. We have to discover it and manifest it. So when we get to the historic eras, so you can go to image 17, Alec, they had what's called the consort principle. So here you see in Michael Pretorius' Syntagma Music in one of his plates that are a family or a consort of gambas. So when they played something in the late Renaissance with instruments, they played it all with one family. They didn't mix instruments. Alec, if you go to the next image, 18, you'll see recorders, the same sort of thing, from a bass recorder on the left to a sopranino, up there on the right. And then if you go to the next image, you can even see Ganassi in his ornamentation treatise. This is the frontispiece of it. You can see that the players in the front there are all playing recorders. And then hanging on the back wall is a consort of gambas. So this means for us is that the sounds must match. If it's a choir, sopranos, altos, tenors, basses, one timbre, high, low, loud, soft, one timbre. It cannot change. Just like a recorder can't change its timbre, a gamba can't change its, nor a sackbut change its timbre. In an orchestra, it's the same thing. And Sir Simon Rattle is great, and he accomplishes it. And the players themselves talk about this, from the principal clarinetist, Andreas Ottensheimer, to the principal cellist, Bruno Della Pallere. They talk about listening to each other to accomplish Einklang, one sound, so that they all agree and work together. So now if you'll go to 20, image 20. So here we're jumping to the Romantic era now. And we've got this concept, okay, this is thick, rich vibrato as an element or characteristic of sound, but that's not so. That's not so at all. So I'll just read the red. So from the violin treatise of 1832, the motion of vibrato must be slight, and the deviation from the perfect intonation of the tone should hardly be perceptible to the ear. And the cello one, the next one, could suggest to use the shaking vibrato very rarely. Manuel Garcia, one of the great singers and teachers of singing, wrote in 1840, vibrato should be adopted with great taste and in moderation, for its expression or duration, if exaggerated, becomes fatiguing and disgraceful. And then if you'll scroll, Alex, coming up in time, now the beginning of the 20th century, Andreas Moser and Joseph Joachim. Joseph Joachim was Brahms's violinist. He was the concertmaster for the performance of the Requiem. And he traveled with Brahms a lot. They were friends and working colleagues. And then he says, the student cannot be sufficiently warned against its habitual use. A violinist whose taste is refined and healthy will always recognize the steady tone as the ruling one, and will use vibrato only where the expression seems to demand it. And then as far as 1921, its pervasive use is warned against. Even Arnold Schoenberg talks about not liking the pervasive use of vibrato. So when we listen, for instance, to a recording of Brahms motets, and I've got at least 10 of them, and they're all, I'm afraid to say, except for one of them, really just impossible to listen to. And we don't like them. None of you is going to like them. And you're not going to want to perform the Brahms motets. You're just not going to want to do them because it's not going to sound good, because the vibrato will be too thick and whatever. So I'm going to recommend you, and I shouldn't. I really shouldn't, and I apologize. But on the Santa Fe Desert Chorale recording, Encore, that's the name of the recording, tracks 3, 4, and 5 are the 3 movements of Brahms' epic last motet, Fest und Gedenkstücke. And it's without much vibrato, and you can really hear the tuning there. So sound depends upon us knowing what is in the music. And for us to know that, we need to know what they said during history about their sound. What the people of the Renaissance said, what the people of the Baroque era said, and what the people of the classical era said. And for those of you who don't know these books that Alec has published, and he'll testify to this, it's not me talking in these books. I quote person after person, treatise after treatise. Who talks are the people from the era. They're the ones who are saying what it is that needs to be done. And finally, in closing, you don't need to put up another image. Oh, you can put back to me, I guess, since I'm here, is this will lead us to expression. And in order to create a true excellence, an excellence that everybody recognizes, it has to be beyond notes and rhythms. You can't just do them. And so I'm going to say that for those years when I was in Texas teaching at TCU, and I certainly knew Texas's commitment to solfege, and I admired it. I mean, the Texas singers are literate. I mean, they can sight read anything, and this is great. But oftentimes, solfege is used as a means to an end. And if you go into rehearsal and you spend hours and hours just on solfege, you will never get to the text. And the text will then keep you from the expression, and you will never, ever create a visceral feeling of aesthetic excellence. So to really get there as the ultimate, as to what is it in Star Trek, the Final Horizon, or something like that, it is expression. You eventually have to get to the expression of the music, and it's in the music as his sound. You just have to find it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Alec.
Thank you so much. A couple of questions have come into the chat, so we'll go through them. Ryan Chatterton wants to know, what are some tips to encourage our singers to use vibrato in the manners that you were describing?
Okay, I will say breath is the key element. And the more one focuses on breath and movement, the more the sound is not static. And if the sound or if the singer is static, then it leads to, a vibrato that is not contributing to what you want to do. But if you're talking about breath flow, and I'm not talking about the Csikszentmihalyi flow, I'm literally talking about the speed of breath, then it really, really does help. Number two, if you focus on phrase shape, so if you're focusing on going from here to there, or I call points of arrival in Renaissance music, Sicucervus desiderata fontes aquarum, Sicucervus desiderata fontes aquarum, from Pastorina's famous motet, that really prevents a static kind of singing, and vibrato is almost gone. So Ryan, you'll know, I almost never mention vibrato in rehearsal. In fact, sometimes it's true. I just don't mention it at all. It's because I don't need to mention it, because I can get around it by working at other things.
Great. Couple more questions. Judith Marriott wants to know, do you ever have the primary goal of correcting intonation, or do you find that it corrects itself while you're attaining another goal?
No, I do, absolutely. And this has become a goal. And I, like Jameson Marvin at Harvard, when he was there for many years, I tune chords. So I'll get to mileposts, or I isolate a chord and tune it according to the overtones series. So I'll say, give me the root. Of course, it's generally the basses, not always, but generally the basses. And then they'll sing it, whatever. And then I'll say, now add the octaves. And then the octaves add to them. And they'll adjust. It's almost like you're switching tuning sort of thing. You almost don't have to tell them. No, they'll adjust it until it'll get in tune. And then we add the fifth, and then we add the third. And then, great, now let's do it quickly. Root, octave, fifth, third. Okay, fine. Now, all together. Okay, now remember it. So we go back and rehearse the passage, getting up to it. Of course, when we get to the chord, it's not exactly as it was. And I ask, now, is this exactly the chord? And they'll say no. And I'll say, well, why not? We have to do that. Here's the chord, let's get to the chord. And so I do that, I mean, with orchestras too. And in many of the choirs, there are lots of non-music majors. You'd be amazed how quickly they pick up on this. And so when I say, give me the root, they find it. And so if you're doing a Morton Lauridsen piece, often that chord, has the third or the fifth in the bass part. Oftentimes the bass is not the root of the chord. And so then, of course, it becomes challenging and more complex when it's not just simply the bass. But yes, intonation can be a goal in and of itself, and I've worked at that. Also with vowels, e, a, ha, o, hu, o, ha, e, e, just to make sure they are all not only of one timbre, but of one intonation. Same thing with clarinets, oboes, bassoons, and flutes. Just pass this back and forth, until you get a unity of timbre. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Moselle Busos wants to know, is there a recommended seating arrangement when you have all female singers, such as soprano 1 and 2, alto 1 and 2? How do you see?
Again, when I had the middle school girls, I varied it. I first put them in a V shape with me and the piano kind of in the middle, sopranos in front and altos in the back. But then I switched them, altos in the front and sopranos in the back. And then later on, I switched them again, alto sopranos, so that they were kind of more mixed up. And so my answer to this question is, there is not one seating arrangement. There are multiple ones, and that depends upon, one, your goal, or two, what you hear that you don't particularly like. And I have to say, one of the best seating arrangements for single timbred choir, which is to say all gender specific choirs, all women or all men, but we can't say that, because we have, mixers in there. And by the way, when I was in Texas, I had 2 femtens, which they called themselves that. They were 2 feminine tenors. So they were 2 women singing tenor. So I couldn't say, okay, guys, I had to say tenors and basses. But for those single things, oftentimes the best is to let them decide. Just say, okay, go, sit where you want. And you'd be amazed. You'd be absolutely amazed. So there is not one specific one, but there are multiple ones, seating arrangements.
Great, thank you. And last question, what are your upcoming book projects? Question that I love, so.
Well, Alec and I have actually talked about this, or I have actually mentioned this to him and mentioned this to other people. And it's something that I think needs to be done. And it's a book I'm calling America's Choral Heritage. The subtitle would be The History of Choral Singing in the United States. And it would be the history of children's choirs, the history of symphonic choirs, the history of church choirs, the history of college choirs, of course, and all of these. And it needs to be done because we do need to know our heritage. And we forget. I mean, if I would say to the general audience, who's Howard Swan, they probably wouldn't know, but they need to know. How many young people today know who Robert Shaw is, or F. Mellius Christiansen, or John Finley Williamson? Our heritage needs to be known. However, Alec, please forgive me for this. You should know that there is up and coming a second edition of choral repertoire. That's Oxford.
Of
I mean,
course.
it's given. It's on its way. And they're talking about me doing a fourth book for them called Choral Treasures. And these would be pieces that are underrepresented, studies of underrepresented and underrepresented composers like Michael Haydn, instead of Joseph, his brother, and underrepresented pieces of music. And a lot of it is for diversity, obviously, for women and for composers of color. It's a very interesting project, but I don't know, Alec, we may have to have a little conversation if you think I should really do America's Choral Heritage, because if I do, I definitely want you to do it. I definitely.
Great.
You're definitely the publisher that should do this. But anyway, I never ever thought I would become this person I've become, but I have. And so here I am, and I love it. And so I'm going to keep at it.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just say, Dr. Shrock, I think you're an amazing gift to the choral community. We're lucky to have you. We're lucky to learn from you, which you do each and every day. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone for being here. And like I said, we'll post this on YouTube, and please let folks know about it. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.